Hi everyone, my name is Akhil. Please watch my introduction video for an explanation of what we're doing here. Assuming you already have, let's get into what someone who makes less than 10 lakhs a year should do with their money in India. Another way to think of this video is everything you should do to build a net worth of 8 lakhs. In fact, if you make more than 10 lakhs a year, but your net worth is less than 8 lakhs, or you're worth more, but your money is just sitting in a savings account like some of you I know, this is really the video you should watch. So the first step, as with most financial advice, is to calculate your expenses. And when you're doing that, try to consider a whole year rather than a month like most people do. I think a good way to go about this is to look at your credit card bill for the last year, add ATM withdrawals and bank transfers, which I'm guessing will mostly be rent. Personally, I wouldn't spend a ton of time on this. A lot of people get super into the details with their budget, and a lot of financial advisors tell you to keep track of really small expenses because they add up. In my experience, small things, unless they're done super regularly, generally add up to small things. It's the big things that you need to watch out for. What's more, expenses change over time, so being super accurate about them right now isn't really all that helpful. I'm not going to go into detail about how to calculate your expenses because that seems kind of basic. Plus or minus 10% is fine for an average year. This will bring us to our second step. Take that amount and decide how much you want is your emergency fund. If you're a young person with no dependents and a very stable job, that emergency fund can honestly be as low as 3 months. A quarter of your yearly expenditure that we just calculated. Though I wouldn't usually recommend this. If you're someone with dependents in a less reliable field like a freelancer, you may want to have a 2-year emergency fund or more. But if you leave out those extremes, you're mainly going to want to have somewhere between half and a full year's expenses in your emergency fund. This is money you keep liquid and never spend, except, as the name implies, in emergencies. And to be clear, emergencies don't include a great investment opportunity. If you're someone who has trouble saving, a good way to get to this target amount is to calculate a monthly investment you can afford from your salary and start a recurring deposit. Check the RD interest rate at your bank and use an RD calculator online to check the period over which you need to make that investment to get to your target amount. For example, if you're looking for an emergency fund of 1 lakh and you can save 8K a month, you may find that it takes you about a year to make your fund. So 96K will come from the principal and 3K will come from the interest. A note here is, you can probably see, RDs in general are not great investments. I've used them once to make my emergency fund during my first year working, and I've never used them again. But if you're someone who has trouble saving unless the money is actually put away, this is a good way to go about it. Just make sure to send it to an RD immediately after you get your salary. Another good thing about RDs early in your career is that they're taxed at your income slab. So if you've just started your first job and aren't making a lot of money, it's a good time to use them. Now, after creating this fund, what should you do with it? And honestly, the answer is nothing. Essentially, medical expenses and sustaining yourself after losing a job are the only 2 reasons to use this fund. What I would recommend is putting it in a recurring FD. Some people don't realize that when you break an FD, the fee you pay is only on the interest, not on the principal, so at worst you're just going to get your money back. You could also look for a savings account that has a higher interest rate, or a liquid fund, which is like a savings account that invests in stable debt instruments. These give you a slightly better return on average and a very low risk. But honestly, unless your emergency fund is really huge, the marginal gain you make here over an FD is not likely to matter. The good thing about putting it in an FD is that it makes you less likely to spend it, since it's not accessible without breaking the FD. And I find that that ends up being kind of a block and people don't take that step, whereas a liquid fund is more accessible and you're more likely to break the rules. Another good thing about an FD is it keeps your amount roughly adjusted for inflation. A final note, remember to keep adjusting this fund to represent 6 to 9 months of your expenses as you progress through your career and your life. If you ever have dependents, remember to reevaluate. Anyway, that's step 2 done, so let's move to step 3. If you have any money after the money you're setting aside to build your emergency fund, you can actually start step 3 in parallel with step 2. And in general, I don't recommend investing until you've got your emergency funds sorted, but this is the only exception, maxing out your ATC savings. The reason this is an exception is there's a level of return it guarantees that is just too good to walk away from. And as a result of the tax saving angle, it can't be postponed to later, or at least it can't be postponed to the next financial year. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, ATC is a tax deduction that allows you to subtract up to 1.5 lakhs from your taxable income by investing in certain financial products. There are a bunch of different ways to save under ATC, including long-term FDs and PPFs, but the three that most people consider most often are Ulips, ELSS, and NPS. And since this whole series is about simplification, I'm not going to tell you about all the different options. I'm just going to talk about these three, which I choose and why. Ulips are unit-linked insurance plans. To put it very simply, they allow you to invest monthly or yearly, sometimes quarterly, and you can usually choose whether that capital is invested in debt or equity. It also offers you life insurance, but they have a lock-in period, meaning you can't get your money back if you want ATC benefits for about 5 years, sometimes more. Otherwise, you may also have to pay a breakage fee. The return on Ulips are not taxable, provided the premium you pay in all of your Ulips put together in a year is 2.5 lakhs or less, and the amount of life insurance you get is at least 10 times your yearly premium. The next option for ATC is ELSS. ELSS schemes are essentially mutual funds with a lock-in period. To those of you who don't know what mutual funds are, watch the second half of the previous video where I talk about the basics of our taxation system and some common terms for this series. The returns on ELSS are generally higher than Ulips, and the lock-in period is 3 years instead of 5. But the downside is that the gains after 1 lakh are taxable at 10%. Also, there's no life insurance provided, which is kind of obvious. It's not a life insurance program. The NPS is the National Pension Scheme. The amount you invest is generally split between equity and a variety of other more stable investments. They give you a higher overall return than FDs and are also tax-free. Although you have to wait till retirement to withdraw the corpus, and even then you only get 60% of the amount. The remaining 40% will remain in the fund and can be withdrawn over the next 15 years, although converting it to an annuity, which used to be required, is no longer required. Unlike the other two schemes, NPS gets an extra 50K that you can invest tax-free, so you can go up to 2 lakhs instead of 1.5, but the money is locked in for so much longer. When you look at the returns over such a long period, you start to see that additional tax saving doesn't justify the difference in return. In general, as long as you're not an idiot with it, money now is always better than money in the future. To me, NPS becomes more attractive after the age of 45. If you're certain you're retiring in India, mainly just because of ease of use, I definitely use the NPS for this case, at least for that extra 50K of tax saving it provides. However, if you're below the age of 40, and especially if you're below the age of 30, I would never choose the NPS because of the period of investments. When you look at any period longer than 10 to 20 years, equity, real estate, and starting a business usually outperform the other options. So let's eliminate NPS as well for simplicity. Now that brings us to the question of which to choose between ELSS and Ulips. This is a slightly more difficult question to answer, so let's compare them. What ELSS generally has going for it is that the returns are slightly higher and the lock-in period is shorter, 3 years versus 5. Personally, I don't really factor the lock-in period when I'm comparing them. I think of all equity investments as being essentially long-term investments. And as you live in India for many years, the moment your 3-year period is done or your 5-year period is done, you're just going to start another one because you always want that ATC benefit. And that 2-year difference tends not to really matter. The returns being on average higher is much more significant. However, this is undercut slightly by the fact that you pay a 10% tax on the profits or after the first 1 lakh, which is tax-free. As we talk about long periods of time and profits far greater than 1 lakh, this actually becomes quite significant. What Ulips have going for them are 2 things. First, you get a life insurance cover. Usually that's going to be 20 times your premium. If you're a younger person, you're getting this cover for a fairly small fee, and the amount can be quite significant. In general, if you have dependents or uninsured loans, I think life insurance is absolutely essential, but there are other ways to get it, but Ulips are a pretty good way too. The second advantage of Ulips is that as long as the insured amount is at least 10 times greater than the premium and the amount you're investing is less than 2.5 lakhs a year, the return is tax-free. Now, the 2.5 lakh premium limit was a new rule set by the government in Feb 2021. Ulips started before that, can be greater than 2.5 lakhs and still be tax-free as long as the other condition is true. But I'd still consider Ulips even now for anyone investing less than 2.5 lakhs a year. Basically, if you're 100% certain you don't want life insurance, ELSS is probably going to be better for you. If you have no dependents or your children are financially independent, ELSS is probably going to give you a better return even when you factor the 10% tax on the profits. Because there are ways to offset some of that, which I'll talk about later. But personally, I actually choose Ulips. I don't have dependents, but I do like having a small amount of coverage. Basically 20 times my 2.5 lakh premium or 50 lakhs. In my case, the insurance payout almost covers what's left on my home loan, and I like the idea of that balance. I would never invest more than 2.5 lakhs a year in a ULIP after the government's rule that the returns on greater premiums are going to be taxable. At that point, ELSS is just hands down better. The other reason is that a significant portion of the amount I save beyond 2.5 lakhs is put in equity anyway. This is important because long-term capital gains are tax-free up to 1 lakh a year. But that's all long-term capital gains from all your sources. And I make use of this cap every year. I go into more details on how to do that in future lessons. Most importantly, if you choose a good ULIP, your returns are actually comparable to a mutual fund. In fact, my ULIP has actually made higher returns than some of my mutual funds, although not most. To be specific, I started a 5-year ULIP at the end of 2015 with 2.5 lakhs a year. As of the end of 2021, 6 years later, the 12.5 lakhs that I've put in is worth 27 lakhs. Is that incredible? No, but it's not bad. A mutual fund would have probably made more, but I wouldn't have had the 50 lakh insurance coverage, and when I do decide to claim it, I know the returns will be tax-free. Remember, these plans are for many years, so even if you don't have extra money beyond your ATC investment right now, you may have it later. And even if you don't have dependents or loans right now, you may have them later. So to summarize my opinion on ATC, if you want life insurance and you have extra money to save beyond the ATC, or you think you're likely to make more money soon, go with Ulips. If you have no dependents and don't want to waste any money on life insurance, and if the 1.5 lakh ATC cap is all you can see yourself saving for the foreseeable future, definitely go with the ELSS, because you'll be able to claim the 1 lakh in returns tax-free per year. And if you aren't getting that elsewhere, the ELSS is definitely going to be the preferable scheme. So those are our 3 steps for people who make less than 10 lakhs a year and for people who've just started investing. Step 1. Identify expenses and determine how much money you need to sustain yourself for about 9 months. Step 2. Set up an RD and build that emergency fund. Once it's built, take the money and put it in an FD. Don't touch it. Remember to reevaluate to see if that still covers 9 months of your expenses from time to time. Step 3. Take any money you have left over and put it in a ULIP or ELSS. Once you've successfully built your emergency fund, continue to put more and more money into that scheme into the scheme you've chosen until about 1.5 lakhs a year. Because at this point, you're getting your maximum possible ATC benefit. You could maybe go up to 2.5 lakhs if you've chosen ULIPs, but definitely don't go beyond that. If you reach a point where your emergency fund is set up, you're maximizing your ATC, and you still have money left over, you should watch the next video, where I talk about people who make 10 to 25 lakhs a year and what they should do with their money, because that will guide you towards building a 25 lakh net worth. But for right now, I hope you've got an idea on how to get started, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video once you've hit those milestones.